All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back from your vacations. Hopefully you had a grand old time. We get to go on spring break next week. So remember, next week, the main event is if you can come over here to VVC on Wednesday morning, about 9 o'clock. They have the big Mojave Water Agency Summit. So that's kind of what we have next week. And then the week after that, we will be doing the science workshop at Mojave Water Agency. Mrs. Pike and Mr. Huffan, we just need to talk about that. I'm hoping we can just get the folks to get themselves over there. I feel like we did that before, but if we can't, please let me know, and I'm going to have to do something quickly. I just realized during the break that I hadn't done field trip forms, but we can do a thing where if they go to the location, we're okay. So that's Wednesday, April something, with the week after next. So we'll talk about that some more tomorrow. Okay, water law, delta, the twin tunnels, how to get water around the delta, recycling, reuse, stormwater, gray water, conservation, landscape and farming, practices, actually solutions. Chapter 5 is all about the solutions. Okay, so water law and public trust. Okay, so the future of California water management is guided by our laws. All water is owned by the state on behalf of the people. So people might have water rights, but fundamentally, the water is still owned by the state. So if there's a problem, that's when a judge has to get involved, lawsuits happen, people start fighting about it, and the state has to resolve that, okay? The main thing to know about this is California's Constitution always looks for and will reward whoever is using it for the highest, most beneficial use, right? So if you're using your water to, and this is just a silly example, but to water your car, wash your car, and I'm using it to feed and water my family, guess who's going to be upheld in terms of any law issue, okay? And beneficial use is anything that's domestic or profit-making uses. So it's allowed to, of course, to be used for all the things that it's used to, but it prohibits waste or unreasonable use, okay? So that's when they're starting to look at this in a legal court of law. That's what they're going to start looking. Is this, you're fighting for use of this water that is either waste or it's an unreasonable use of that water, okay? Next thing is that, and we've talked about this a little bit before, fortunately chapter 5 really nails it. There's two main types of rights, and those are riparian and appropriative, okay? And we're going to talk about those in a moment. That all was formalized back in 1914, okay? And it all happened because these folks were very innovative. I'm always amazed at how innovative folks were back in the old days. They would go up, build a little dam upstream in the gold mining areas, central Northern California. I'd build a dam, and they'd take wooden pipes. Sometimes these pipes were actually wooden, and they'd build up tremendous pressure going downgrade, and then they would blast. What you can see here is they're blasting into the side of the mountainside with streams of water. It's called hydraulic mining, to basically dislodge the rock and hopefully the gold-bearing ore, and then that went down into sluices where they looked for the gold, right? They refined not refined the gold, but pulled out the gold. Okay, riparian. The riparian rights are rights that come with the land, and it's for ownership of water if the land is adjacent to the water body, a river, a lake, things like that, right? And they are always senior. In other words, they trump any rights that are appropriative rights. We're going to get to what appropriative rights are in a moment, okay? But moving water away from its source to use elsewhere requires appropriative rights, right? So if I can use my riparian rights on my property, which is right there. But if I'm, for example, Apple Valley Ranchos, now Liberty Water, and I want to take that water across town, Now I fall under appropriative rights. Okay? So what are appropriative rights? They are the first person to take a quantity of water from the water source for beneficial use has the right to continue. Okay? So I'm the first there, and I start using the word. I've got appropriative right. I appropriate everyone else behind me because I was there first. I was using that water. Okay? But again, look at it needs to be for beneficial use, right? Agricultural, industrial, or household, right? Okay, so pre-1914, post-1940, they're just talking about this basic primary body of law that set this up. Riparian versus appropriative happened with this act in 1914. In 1931, in reaction to LA taking water from the Owens River, right? So we've talked a little bit about this. Very controversial. LA basically snuck up into the Owens River. Beautiful valley, hopefully you've all been to, on the eastern Sierras here, up past Mount Whitney, going up to Bishop. They really did sneak in there, and they bought up a bunch of land because they wanted to grab the water. Once they had the land, then they put in the LA water aqueduct. Okay? And so the local people were up in arms once they discovered what was going on. They blew up the aqueduct a few times. There was a couple of people killed. All kinds of controversy around this because they stole their water. So basically, all those farmers and a lot of those communities suffered severely. Okay, but in response to that, they basically came up with this idea that a county or watershed origin of provision. So the place that the water comes from has rights. In other words, that watershed, that county, that area in the Owens River Valley, they have some rights. And we'll see in a moment, much later on, they sued for those rights and they won. And for example, they sued for the rights to re-water the Owens River, to put water back into the Owens River, to flood Owens dry lake bed and reduce the dust, to restore Mono Lake, which is probably one of the natural wonders of the world. If you haven't been there, you definitely need to go there. Okay, so here we are. Here's who the players were. The early guys got the water, but the people who run this are the LA Department of Water and Power. You'll see quite a few of their vehicles around this area. They are also the ones that are in charge of the hydroelectricity we spoke about the other day, coming from the Colorado, from the big dams on the Colorado. So this is just their truck superimposed. Amazing place because it's overshadowed here by the Sierras, right? Again, incredibly amazing, beautiful area. Before you die, you got to hike into the Sierras. Okay, and this is just looking actually out on the lake. We did some work for them early on in our department. We grew plants for them, but they're actually re-watering. This is actually a grass that they are growing on that dry lake bed now to cut down on the dust. That dust proved to be an environmental hazard, a health hazard for those little towns like Lone Pine. They sued for that, and now LA Department of Water Power has to do tremendous mitigation. They've got to fix that problem. All right. Water law continued. 1970s, we all know this if we've been studying environmental science for a while. 1970s, where people all of a sudden woke up and said, you know what, we're overusing and abusing these resources. We're causing a lot of pollution. We've got to start putting some laws in. And so these are some of the federal laws. The Federal Clean Water Act, okay? People have a right to clean water. Safe Drinking Water Act, Endangered Species Act. We've seen this in several contexts already. Federal and state wild and scenic river systems. So rivers that are undisturbed can be declared a wild and scenic river, and that gives them some protection, okay? Deep Creek is in the process of being, our little Deep Creek coming down from Big Bear, coming down into the Mojave here, is in the process of being declared one of these. I don't know the status. If somebody does, let me know, okay? In 1983, there was a really significant court decision, and again, this is all kind of boring, this law stuff, but on the other hand, it's really significant because I think if anything in this class, if you've realized that it's the policy, it's the law that drives a lot of what we can and can't do, and it's also really important. It's important that it's properly crafted, and it's important that it's properly implemented, okay? And they came up with a thing called the public trust doctrine. It's a body of law, it's enacted into law, which says, and it was based on Mono Lake. And we'll talk about Mono Lake again a little bit in a moment. It's this beautiful lake north of Bishop, north of Bishop. And so to protect that, we'll come to its story in a moment, they came up with the public trust doctrine, which basically says, you know what, people are entitled to be concerned about environmental damage from using this water in different ways. So this is what starts to set up and really consolidates this idea that water has to be used for environmental use as well. Remember, 39% environmental use. It's this law, most particular, that sets that up. And so it needs to be environmental and even aesthetic. If I like Deep Creek, which I very much do, you know, you've got the springs up there that you all probably know, the hot springs. But above that and below that is some of the most spectacular scenery you've ever been. So again, get in your car, drive up to the end of Deep Creek Road, hike up, you're going to see a bunch of graffiti on the wall and on the rocks for a while. But hike up towards Big Bear, go in there 5 miles, go down onto the river, especially now when there's a bit of water flowing in, and it's absolutely spectacular. Beautiful pools to swim in. Just don't dive off the rocks, right? You guys all know the story of the fellow, most recently was a young football player from Apple Valley High School that dove off the rocks, right, and got killed maybe 2 years ago. You guys know that story? It's not a story, it happened. Yeah. So anyway, aesthetic is important. We as a people are allowed to protect and want to keep these places in a pristine, quality way. Okay. California Central Valley Project, CVP. Okay. One of the big water projects. We all know this by now. It's mostly agriculture in the Central Valley, our breadbasket. This is where we first started to see water law that was influenced by environmental concerns, because they took 800,000 acre-feet of annual runoff, they returned that back into the environment. They put it back into the San Joaquin River, they put it back into wetlands in that area to restore wetlands, to restore the salmon migrations, things like that. Okay? Interesting about this environmental water, that's that 39% of our total. 28% of it goes to restoring wetlands, okay? So anybody got an idea why they would put so much effort into wetlands? Why are we concerned about wetlands? Do you guys have you on mic? Anybody got an idea? Let me quickly see that I got you on the I didn't mute you here. Okay. Okay? Any ideas? Why would we we're going to put all this water into the environment, why do we focus so much on wetlands? Mr. Haffan's pointing at someone over there. Someone's on the spot. What's Mr. Haffan doing? He's pointing down. Mr. Haffan losing it over there. Oh, the mic. Yeah, there's somebody who wants to come up. Come on, quick. Come on, you guys. Someone, take a guess. Okay, Mr. Haffan, you'll have to do it.
The question again?
Why, if we had to put water back into the environment, would we take 28% of it and put it into wetlands alone? 28% of that total water.
Because wetlands are the most productive ecosystems on the planet?
Yes. Plain and simple, absolutely. So what kinds of things happen in wetlands, you guys?
Reproduction?
Breeding cycles, nurseries for all little plants and bugs and animals. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, thank you. Boy, say it again.
Nutrient recycling.
Nutrient recycling, exactly. A lot of nutrient recycling. They also have great benefits, right, for preventing floods. We talked about how in New Orleans, if the wetlands had been functioning down there better, they would have absorbed much of that flood from Katrina at the time of the floods in New Orleans. All right, good. So water law continued, Water Conservation Act of 2009. Basically, now we start to make actual laws in California about conservation, okay? Showers, landscaping, how we do our landscaping, all those things. 20 by 2020, 20% reduction by December 31st, 2020. Another one was the Rainwater Capture Act. If you can believe it, in places it was illegal to take the water off your rooftop and collect it, and many people still believe that. But in 2012, we had to pass a law to say, no, that's a good thing to do, just like all our forefathers used to do. I've got that brewing at my house. I don't have it set up yet. Gray water, you separate your toilets from all your other washing water, and you put that out on your lawns and on your landscape, okay? All right, 25% mandate in March 2015. There's rumblings of them bringing this back, reinstituting this, because people have kind of forgotten. But when the drought was really bad in 2015, Governor Brown said all urban water users will save 25%, and if they don't, they'd get fined. And they were fined in certain cases. Funnily enough, it was the wealthy people in places like Santa Monica that had the toughest time. I was at an outreach event in Joshua Tree the other day, and this guy came up from that area, and he was just incensed still that he had to think about limiting his landscape use and taking out his lawn. And it was just interesting. It was interesting to hear that perspective from someone who definitely wasn't short of finances and resources. Okay, so public trust doctrine, back to that, makes governments legally responsible to protect resources with environmental and aesthetic values. That's navigable rivers for navigation, fisheries, commerce, environmental conservation, recreation, and even ecological research, right? Ecological research is a valid reason that that particular water resource, that wetland, should be conserved, right? Should be managed. And then this led to the most recent law, the Sustainable Groundwater Law. You guys must know this. This is now we have to have sustainable groundwater basins. We're going to come back to this in the next lecture. And that's the biggest law most people think that's been passed in California, bar none in recent history. Because this is going to make a huge difference to the way we live, the way we farm, the way we do industry. This think tanks believe that this is a very significant law. And we're going to come back to that tomorrow, okay, when we do the list. Okay, Mono Lake real quickly. This is where the public trust doctrine developed. So we got Mono Lake, a lot to think about. City of LA licensed to develop mono basin. So you've got the Owens River, and then you go up to Bishop, and then you go up this long grade, and you come up at another level. It's actually up where Mammoth is. How many of you skied at Mammoth? Anybody gone up to Mammoth? Show of hands. Cool. So Mono Lake is just beyond the turnoff to Mammoth. Yeah, just beyond it. And they were diverting all the water that was flowing into Mono Lake. Mono Lake was already saline, salty, and it lost half of its volume, and salinity doubled in those 50 years. And it became where they were endangering this incredible ecosystem, right? It's a funny little ecosystem. It's based on a brine shrimp, a tiny little shrimp that lives in the salty water, an alkali fly that lives there as well, and then all the birds and everything else that feed on that food chain, right? It's the biggest breeding colony for California gulls and the site of the recovery of the brown pelican, right? One of my favorite birds of all time is the brown pelican. Those are the guys that look like jumbo jets as they fly over the waves down on the coast. Just adore those birds. They've made a complete recovery, but their main nesting area was Mono Lake. Okay, so it was very important that the public trust doctrine be made law and also enacted, implemented. So here's a real quick picture of that. Not a very good one. Now that I see it blown up, I got to find a better one. Here you got the mountains behind. These are the Sierras. These are the tofus, or tufus, I think they call them. These are like salt pillars. Here's a gull. If you can see that in a complete cloud of brine flies, right? These little flies, and just opening its mouth and eating as much as it can. So very, very cool area, incredibly gorgeous. If you're interested in any of this stuff, you'd need to go there. Just, you know, catch a bus. That would work too. Okay. Lawsuits, National Audubon Society, several others, local people got together. 1994, judge ordered the State Resources Control Board, which is the State Water Quality Board, the same one, Lahotton, that we'll still hopefully get a lecture from, works here locally on things like Hinckley and the Chromium-6, ordered them to require City of LA, specifically LA Department of Water and Power, LADWP, to refill the lake to 27 foot below pre-diversion levels, okay? So always there's trade-offs, right? They didn't require them to bring it all the way back up. They within 27 foot of that, right? Because that was determined with science, I know and I'm sure, that would make that lake healthy again. Well, by 2015, so 1994, so basically 20 years later, almost 20 years later, lake is still 10 foot below target, right? And possibly because of drought years and possibly also because of climate change. And so at that point, the Mono Lake Committee and some others started looking at a second lawsuit to see if they could force LADWP to do more. Beside the fact LADWP actually had done quite a lot. Those streams around it, those lakes around it, well, streams around it, they've restored them, they've kept the cattle out of them, they've restored the fisheries in there, the native brown trout for one reason, for one thing. I've been there, they've done a great job. LAWP has spent millions of dollars restoring things there. So despite that, they still hadn't missed their target. So as far as I know, that lawsuit was never filed. Last year they had the opposite problem where they had so much runoff, they weren't sure what to do with it when we had those massive storms last year. Okay, Delta issues. All right, changing gear real quick. The Delta, right? All our water, over 50% of it for Southern California, comes down through the Sacramento Delta, down the Sacramento River or from the San Joaquin River coming north. And we divert it, we put it in various aqueducts, the biggest one being the State Water Aqueduct, right? The one that ends in Hesperia, in Lake Silverwood. Okay? And the idea was there were some issues. At the diversions, where they pumped the water out of the delta, there was stream declines in some salmon species, some smelt, and some shad. But it was more than that. It wasn't just the fish. They really, what the environmental side of the house was looking at is they were seeing a degradation in the delta in general. So they were looking for solutions, all right? So the largest stresses on the delta in general are water pollution, competition from introduced species like carp. Carp is a fish that's introduced and kind of takes over. Increased pumping. So our thirst, as it were, has increased to where back in 1990 to 1999, 4.6 million acre feet were diverted into aqueducts to come south or to go to agriculture. And that grew to 6 million acre feet by 2000 to 2007, similar period of time. Only 25 delta smelt. Delta smelt is an endangered species. And only 25 were found in the annual population count in 2008. And in 2008, the salmon fishing season was canceled because things were under severe stress. So what could be done? Okay, so here's a real quick picture. Again, a little pixelated, but there you have one of the channels in this. It's like this big maze of channels. You got these huge levees along the edge, and you've got agriculture on one side. Here you've got population. This is an area of massive population explosion. People will drive all the way from here into San Francisco, into the Silicon Valley. So here's another better look at these fingers and these canals and agriculture right in there in these islands. The problem with these islands is they're actually below sea level, below water, not sea level, but water level, right? So this farmland here is 50, 60, 70 feet lower than this water. Well, no, there's a 60, 70 feet levee, but it's probably 10 or 20 foot. When I look at it, I don't know the exact figure, but when I've looked, I was just up there again. I love to go out in this area. It's absolutely fascinating to see all that's going on. But I stopped in and drove along one of these levees, one of my recent trips up there for curriculum. But anyway, it's below sea level. So if earthquakes come, if we have extreme flooding, this can all turn into just a big polluted, not a polluted, but a flooded area where then we won't be able to pull the water very efficiently. So, getting to the punchline. Federal court ordered 30% reductions in the pumping. Well, that's really critical because that means even if the water is available that year, they cut back anyway on low years, drought years. But even if it's available there, they said you had to reduce it by 30%. This is all in the 208, 209 area. And so that means less water coming to us, 30%, 1/3 less water coming down here south. So this is huge. This is a big deal. So in 2010, they formed the Delta Stewardship Council as a way to start dealing with some of these issues. Here's some pictures of the big pumping station out of the delta. There it's coming in from the delta, and then it pumps it up into a lake that's just right up on the front side of this. Oh, geez, these pictures are awful when I see them big. Lake Silverwood, right there. Here's the aqueduct. Just giving you a picture of the State Water Project real quick. Delta Stewardship Council, they were a continuation of a group called CalFed. Sounds like a savings and loan or a bank of some kind. But they were a group of 23 state and federal agencies that tried to look for solutions to the Delta and tried to figure out how can we still serve agriculture? How can we get the water to go to the people down south? How can we conserve and protect the environment? So basically down here, the urban interests, the agriculture interests, the environmental advocates all have to be taken care of. So the biggest thing that came up was this thing called the Twin Tunnel Project. The biggest, most expensive public works project ever in the United States. So this thing is big, okay? Very, very expensive. Each of the tunnels are 40 feet wide. So that classroom you're sitting there and your longest point in your classroom is probably just about that, 40 feet wide. So remember, think of a tunnel with a circumference of 40 feet, really big. They're 35 miles long. And this idea had been around for a long time. There was an idea of peripheral canal. Basically what happens is closer to the Sierras, before the water comes all the way out in the delta, these canals cut across. They actually parallel, and this is in your book, you'll see this. They parallel the Highway 5 right in front of Stockton, which, Stockton, this delta is so big that Stockton has navigable channels. Small ships can go all the way up to Stockton to do all kinds of freight and transport things. Okay. Took 8 years of planning, still going on. And the main idea pushed behind it, interesting enough in this case, was the environmental issues. How do we fix the riparian and the tidal marshes and the grasslands, okay? And the tunnels provide an alternative to pumping water from the south edge of the delta. The delta goes west and south. So instead of pumping way down here, we want to catch it the Sacramento River much higher up and divert it down into the aqueduct, coming into the aqueducts. The two main being the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project coming to us, so that it doesn't go out into the Delta at all. But it's highly controversial. And it was in response to predicted rising sea level change and climate change. And it would be 150 foot below the Delta surface. So not as only is it this big hole, this big tunnel, but it's 150 feet down. Okay, it's a gravity flow. Cost of $4.5 billion, but that's been escalating and going up ever since. The concerns were that the cost has been a huge issue, because even us down here would have to pay for it. They most likely would put out another bond with Mojave Water Agency for us to help pay for that. So that would come off your real estate taxes, just as all other bonds do, right? So the concerns are that it would just encourage us down here in agriculture to take more water. It's an easy way. They wouldn't be able to control it. They wouldn't be able to manage it. So we would take more water out of the Delta, out of that region, for irrigation and population growth in Southern California. The other concern is whether there's enough of a cost benefit, right? In any project, you've got to make sure that the cost matches what the benefits are. So there's issues about that. Ecosystem restoration, what they've done now in terms of fixing this is they separated those. The tunnels, mostly about water supply and all that, and then the mitigation, the restoration of the ecosystems, they've separated that out, and we'll see in a little bit they even floated a bond for that, okay? So it's been characterized, this whole debate about the tunnels, as fish versus farmers, right? So is the water going to go to protect the fish and the ecosystem, the little delta smelt, because it's the endangered species it's kind of focused on? And the farmers are like, so we don't get to produce our crops, we don't get to live. The farm workers are up in arms because they see less farming, less agriculture, and it's all based on a fish. So, but that's not what it is at all. That endangered species was just sort of the focal point for all of this, okay? Farmers on island within the Delta itself are also against it. So if you're further down in the Delta, you're concerned because maybe they're going to take off too much water and you're not going to get the water you need for farming when you're a Delta farmer. These farmers we're talking about here are the ones further south down in the San Joaquin Valley, right? So there's even controversy between which farmer you are and where your farm is, okay? Alternative plans that go to a single tunnel, and flows are insufficient to protect public trust issues again. Proposed separating the tunnels from the conservation habitat elements. They've already done that. They pulled the conservation out of it. And then they did float a bond, right, to pay for all of this, pay for some of this, and that was Proposition 1. And here's some of the things that bond funded. So bonds are a loan against the government, right? Actually, they're a loan against the people, because we basically, through our taxes, lend the money to the state to do this, right? $8 million for water conservation, recycling, dams, watershed protection, clean up pollution in groundwater, repair of levees. So this $7.5 billion was spread out over a kind of plethora of different issues that needed to be funded and need to be done. Okay. Proposition 1, a shift away from dependence on the Sierra Nevada snowpack. So we're trying to fix our current water supply so we're not as dependent on the snowpack. We all know that because of climate change, there's serious concerns that the snowpack will continue in the way it is. Will there be as much precipitation? And B, will it come in the same way? If it comes in the terms of rain, it's warmer and it's not snow, then it won't sit up there as a nice bank. It'll actually flood and cause flooding ahead of the time we need it, which is spring into the summer, right? It'll kind of run away, wash away. Okay, recycle, reuse, localizing water. Okay, so changing ideas here a little bit. Another solution is for us to recycle and reuse the water, right? And so we'll see this on our field trip. One of the things is to recycle and reuse our sewage water, right? And those are called purple pipe systems. You'll see them at several parks up here. When you see a purple pipe, that means that's non-potable water. Potable means drinking, and it's just strictly for landscaping. Okay, and you'll see signs. They'll post it saying that it's not for drinking. So several cities, Long Beach, West Basin Municipal, are aiming for 100% use and reuse of local water, and therefore weaning themselves of the imported water from the State Water Project, from the Colorado River. This is a very, very powerful solution. Takes some infrastructure, takes some money to get it done, takes people rethinking how they think about stuff. Ultimately, we'll be drinking, very seldom now is it happening, but we'll be drinking water that's literally been recycled from a sewage plant nearby, right? And we're going to have to change our thinking to be okay with that. Because most people right now, you'll see when we go to Victor Valley Wastewater Reclamation Authority, at the end of the process, you theoretically, well, you can drink that water. They won't let you drink it because it's a legal issue. Then you're going to, if something did happen, you got food poisoning a day later, then you're going to blame it on that. But you could drink that water. It's potable water by the time it comes out of there. Okay, there's a picture of recycled water and a sign, the purple pipes, pretty distinctive. So, what is it called? We've got a lecture up on this, and you guys, by the way, you have several lectures and videos that you're going to need to watch to kind of catch up from your break. Those are all up on under Unit 4 and Unit 5. And we did one on sewage treatment and recycling already. And it's called tertiary treatment. Tertiary treatment, we have primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. Tertiary treatment is the very end of sewage treatment, where we clean it up and get those bacteria out of there. We disinfect it so that it can be used for potable purposes. Okay, purple piping. State law currently limits the use of recycled water to concrete production plants. So you can make concrete out of it. You can put it on plants, snowmaking, freeway landscaping, commercial laundries, fountains, golf courses, schoolyard lawns, not crop irrigation. We're not going to irrigate our police officers, but crop irrigation and to recharge groundwater aquifers, okay? So what we're doing with most of it up here is a little bit of the landscaping, but it's going on down to Barstow. It comes out of the Victor Valley wastewater plant at Oro Grande, it goes into the river, and it percolates down into the groundwater, ultimately moving down to Barstow. So we always joke with people from Barstow that they're drinking our sewage water, but it's treated, fortunately. Other ways we can do it. We need to remember that all the Earth's water is recycled. It all goes through the hydrological cycle. It's all been sometimes in a sewage situation. It all gets recycled anyway. We can inject it underground. We can use reverse osmosis. We can use to clean it up. That's one of the processes for desalination. That's another way to recycle and use salt water. Okay, and we need to know that if we put it back into the aquifer, it'll prevent seawater infiltration. So any municipality, any water purveyor near the ocean, as they're pumping water out of the ground, there's always the danger that seawater is going to fill that the gap. As they pull water here, it's just going to create a vacuum for seawater to come in. And so that's an issue that gets solved if we treat the water and put it back in the groundwater, recharge the groundwater in place, in situ. Okay. One that I really like is, here's a little bit of change of gear, is rainwater capture. We talked about that 2012. You can use rain barrels, you can use rain gardens, you put it in underground cisterns, you take your gutters and you just put it, I'm going to take mine and put it into my little pool. It's actually, as long as your roof is clean after the first time it rains, it's actually very pure water because it's coming from rain, right? It's already pre-treated, as it were. Grey water systems, washing machines, sink drains, used for landscape watering. I do that. I just fixed mine. Very simple little system. I just run it in a little plastic sump. Then I run another pipe out, and I just move a pipe around to the little bit of landscaping I have. Most of my landscaping is natural because I built a sustainable house and I didn't destroy all the landscaping, all the natural landscaping, natural plants. Okay, conservation. Real quick. This is where there's a tremendous amount of water to be found. In other words, if we were better at conserving, then we don't have to transport and use as much water. And basically, they talk about generating new supplies just by being better conservationists of what we have, right? So in the drought of 2012 to 2014, actually it's quite a lot longer than that. It lasted into 2016. The water board, the state water board, started demanding water conservation plans from water agencies, right? And now they have to also report water. They put meters on the water and they have to report back. Now with the Groundwater Management, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, everyone's going to have to do that. What the trick was before, well, if we use more water here from the State Water Project, we'll report that, but we have a pump in the backyard, a well in the backyard. We're just going to pull our extra water out of the ground because nobody's monitoring that. Well, that's changed. So you're going to have to the whole watershed is going to have to show that they're sustainable, that they're not overusing water. If they aren't, then more restrictions have to come into place. People have to use less water in agriculture, urban, and the environment, unfortunately. Okay. So Jerry Brown, we've already talked about the Cerro Plan, the first ever mandatory water conservation directive in California history. In 2015, he demanded 25% reduction. We've talked about that. How do you do this? It's just an attitude of how you live, right? I woke up this morning. First thing I do in the morning is I go check our batteries to make sure we didn't over drain our batteries the night before from our solar system, right? Constantly, 2 days ago, our well pump started to have problems. So I often have to go up and check our water tank. And when you start going like that and thinking like that, all of a sudden it just kind of becomes part of it. Somebody asked me the other day, was that a big hassle? It really isn't a big hassle. It's actually kind of fun to be conserving. It really is a valuable behavior. I actually kind of enjoy it. Okay, low flush toilets, dual flush toilets, where you've got one level of water for the little stuff and more water for the big stuff. Can't remember what a stealth toilet is, but anyway. Replacing shower heads to low flow shower head, leaky faucets. Leaking is huge, right? One leak in a toilet can lose you 30 to 50 gallons a day. In South Africa now, in Cape Town, they're going to a level where people can only use 50 gallons a day. Never mind wasting it in one toilet. Okay. Running faucets consume 2 to 5 gallons every minute. So think about that. You leave your water on while you're brushing your teeth, and I know everybody kind of laughs at this, but you've just lost a 5-gallon, think of a gas container or a 5-gallon container of water in 1 minute. Pretty significant. Okay. Washing is a huge one. Washing machines, especially the old ones, use massive amounts of water. Okay. Main thing about this whole stewardship ethic is what we've talked about in this whole class: an ethic of being responsible, being good conservationists, good planners, good managers, doing our part, then we start talking about what are the best management practices. What is it we can do? Best management practices. What does the solution look like? Also, we could call those sustainability practices, right? Shower heads, low flush toilets, leak detection, metering, tiered pricing, right? People hate this one, but everywhere now, if you're in a water district, if you use a lot of water, you pay more, okay? Not because you use more, but you actually per unit, per gallon, you pay more if you're a heavy water user. So if you've got a pool and your sprinklers come every morning and water the other people's car and the driveway and all that, you're going to be in a higher tier. And per gallon, you're going to pay a lot more than me down here that's using very, very little water, right? And that's just a way to encourage people to be more responsible. And then, of course, public information campaigns. Like I said, I was at one of these out in Joshua Tree a couple weekends ago. Okay. Stewardship ethic, 2020, repeating ourselves here. Required agricultural water suppliers now have to have agricultural water management plans, irrigation plans. In fact, I was just asked to help with one for Earl Graham, the farmer we saw up there that's putting out that sewage water out on the secondary water out up the top of the Mojave there. And then ultimately, we're all going to have monitored meters on our houses. At the moment, yes, the water company meters our house, how much we're using, but that's not used by any agency to hold us accountable. Ultimately, that'll happen. And a Mojave minimal producer means these are the people that have their own wells. And I'm allowed 10,000 acre feet, which is a lot. That's enough for anywhere between 5 and 10 families from my well. Well, pretty soon that's going to start getting monitored because people are abusing that, particularly people that are farming and using basically a domestic well to do farming. Okay. Waterwise Landscaping, cash for grass, grow native plants, put in the right drip systems. We have a lecture up there from Tony Walters from the Resource Conservation District that'll give you more information on that. I see Granite, you guys are ready to get done. Thanks. We'll see you guys. See you guys tomorrow. Cash for grass. Take your grass, take it out. You're getting paid for it. That program's been around for a while. I heard that it's coming back again. So you'll see very, very much less grass in the Mojave Desert, which is kind of rough. You know, grass looks good. But if you're not really using it, it makes sense, unfortunately, to take it out, put in a hardscape, which could be gravel, could be rocks, this could be the native dirt, and then maybe some highlighted native drought-tolerant plants, so you don't use nearly as much water, okay? So cash for grass, habitat restoration. A lot of the gardening that we promote here at VVC now is actually towards habitat restoration. So put in plants that attract native bees, that attract the local critters to come by, right? I had a roadrunner at the house a couple of days ago. The quail have come back. They go up a little higher than us during the winter. And it's awesome. Only problem is when we try to grow vegetables, then everybody else wants to eat them. So we're doing a completely enclosed garden area that top to bottom, nothing can get in. So that's how you get around that. Conservation on the farm, this is irrigation, okay? So you several of you, we went into this great detail in the environmental science class, and especially in AGNR 175, Ag Environment Society. So agriculture uses 80% of the state's developed water supply. So that's when you don't count the environment, right? So just remember that. We're going to stick to the figures that are the most current, the most accurate, again, of 39% environment, 41% agriculture, and 20% urban. But agriculture is still the biggest water user. So if we can stop flood irrigating, which is, we're almost done, okay? We can stop flood irrigating, which is you have very flat fields, you open a little sluice gate on the side of the field, and you flood the whole thing. Very wasteful, right? A lot of the water runs off, a lot of it evaporates, about 50% efficient in getting the water to the plants. We can replace that with drip and low pressure systems like the one we're going to look at on our 2-day field trip. And like I said, there's a PowerPoint on ag irrigation. That's what we're noting right there. Okay. 20% of current almond and pistachio acreage in the Sacramento Valley. So one thing you can do in agriculture is you can switch crops. You can switch crops from to be good conservationists from something that uses a lot of water. So growing alfalfa for hay uses a tremendous amount of water, for example. Cotton uses a lot of water. And they used to grow a lot of both of those in the Central Valley. Well, they're switching over to things like almonds and pistachios and other crops that use a lot less water, okay? So, yeah, various legislation. In 2009, farmers who are agricultural water suppliers, irrigation districts, if they're operating on 25,000 acres, they've got to start coming up with water management plans. The Groundwater Management Act is gone over the top of that and made that much more stringent and mandatory. Okay, all right. So thank you very much, AE. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Huffine. Take care, you guys. You guys are there on Friday, right?
Got a question for you while you're there.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Is the High Desert Water Symposium next Wednesday on April 11th? Is that required for the course?
No, it's not. It's not required because none of the field trips are. But it would be used in 2 places. One for extra credit as a field trip report, and also as a field trip report for their notebooks. So that's okay, one. So let's say they couldn't go on the other field trips, they could come to the High Desert Summit and do a report on that. So that's where there's basically an incentive to do it.
And this seems to be news to me. It was on the syllabus. I went ahead and submitted a field trip request so that those students who wanted to go can go. I also created